So here you have from also the Chalcolithic period, which is again the Copper Stone Age. You have these little altars, and the altar has a nose on it. They're very similar to what we saw from the treasure cave, where we saw the mace heads that had little noses on them. And here you can see the noses. It's sort of an anthropomorphic altar that you wouldn't burn an animal on this, but you might put some flour on here and maybe some incense, or maybe pour some libations on here. And these are little offering altars that were in probably people's houses, right? And we hear about this in the Tanakh, that the Canaanites were these idolaters that worshipped on top of every hill and under every leafy tree. And here you see these early Canaanites, proto-Canaanites. Here you can see it really looks like a face. Right there is more abstract. Here you can see the little altar looks like a face. Now, this next part is not for the children, because here we have a goddess, and the goddess is holding a vessel on her head that was used to churn butter. And what they would do is they would pour some sort of a milk, probably goat's milk, based on what we're going to see in a minute, into the churning container, but it would pass through, because it was pottery, into the other part of the goddess. And I won't say any more than that. But here we have a goat, which was also used for offerings. And this is the idolatry of the early Canaanites. So it's probably goat's milk, because this is a goat. And those are sort of like these cups that would hold the goat's milk. And they would probably bring this as an offering. They'd come to the temple and they'd pour some milk or something like milk or butter or something, or yogurt, into the top of there as an offering. And it would go inside of the god. The god would consume it, I suppose, in that sense. Now, what's really cool is they found that in the 20th century, there were people still using the same type of churns. Remember one we saw on the head of the goddess? So here you have one that's been found in archaeology, but here's a picture of a modern 20th century person still using one of these churns. They would move it back and forth, and it would, I guess, remove the heavier parts of milk from the lighter parts, produce a butter or maybe really a yogurt. This is actually one of my favorite things in the museum. This is called the Arad Stele. And the Arad Stele is a piece of stone that was found also at Arad, just like in the other spot, also from the early Bronze period. And it depicts the god Tammuz, who is also known in Hebrew as Tammuz. And Tammuz was a god of grain. And the idea of Tammuz was that the grain cycle in the land of Israel throughout the Middle East is that in the winter, I grew up in Chicago, where in the winter everything dies and it comes back to life in the summer. In the Middle East, it's the opposite. Everything comes to life in the winter because it rains, and in the summer it's dry and everything dies. And so here you see the god alive, standing up with his hands raised, and then the god is dead. And what the ancients believed, the religion of Tammuz, of Tammuz, what they believe is that this life and death of the god represented, or not just represented, carried over into the life cycle of grain. And so the death of the god actually brought life to the world. When you went to harvest your crops, you cut your crop because Tammuz had died for you, and that brought you sustenance for the rest of the year. But he didn't remain dead, because when it started to rain in the winter, Tammuz rose from the dead, and that they saw as a resurrection. And it was a cycle, they believed, of this death and resurrection every year that carried over into the religion of Baal as well. And you actually have this great scene in the book of Ezekiel, where it says Ezekiel's taken to the temple in Jerusalem, and he sees the women weeping over Tammuz. Why were they weeping over Tammuz? Because Tammuz had died for them to bring them life. And they were actually sad about the death of their god, but they knew he would rise again in the winter, come back to life in a resurrection. And this was the cycle of many ancient deities of a death and resurrection. It wasn't just a one-time death and resurrection, it was an annual cycle. And then they would celebrate his birth. When would they celebrate his birth? The birth of the god in the winter. And this goes back to the early Bronze period. You can see this from Arad. According to the archaeologists, 5,000 years ago, 3000 BCE. Now here we have a section that in the Israel Museum they call the religion of Canaan, or Canaan. And we see some really interesting things. Let's look over here. We see a statue. We see a statue here of a man standing on a bull, and he has this circle on his chest with a plus symbol. And this is the statue of Baal. Baal, one of his attributes, one of his characteristics was the bull. And what they would do is they would have these different symbols that would represent the god. So you have a man standing on a bull, and you can have a man standing on the bull with a plus inside of the circle. Sometimes you just had the plus. And this symbol, everybody knew in the ancient world, this is the symbol of Baal. You don't need the man, you don't need the bull. You could have those, you could have just the bull. But in this case, you have the plus, and what probably was a sun symbol, right? You have circle with light coming in different directions. It represents the sun. So he was a storm god, but he also was represented by the sun. And then here you have a beautiful in maybe a historical sense, but also abominable. You have a statue that was found inside Tel Dan. Tel Dan is the most northern city in Israel, and inside the gate, they found these standing stones. These standing stones are mentioned in Deuteronomy. It says, don't make for yourself a matzevah. A matzevah is a standing stone. And here you have these little standing stones, and they were part of a temple that was inside the gate. And it's really interesting. In Deuteronomy, it also talks about, it says, don't bring your sacrifices in one of your gates, but only in the place Yehovah commanded you. And we usually translate gates there as cities, but every city had a gate, multiple gates sometimes. And inside the gates, there was a court, and there was often a temple. You read about that in the story of Josiah, that after he gets the idols out of the temple in Jerusalem, he then tears down the high place that was built inside the city gate. So here at Zion, they had a city gate with a little temple. And there you can see the hands are raised. They're raised up to what? To the bull, representing Baal. And inside the horns of the bull, you see the sun disk. Right? Sometimes it's the plus symbol, which is representing the rays of the sun. Here's the sun disk inside the horns of the bull, very clearly a representation of Baal. And the hands are raised in prayer. In the Tanakh, we hear about raising hands in prayer, in worship. And here they raise their hands in worship and prayer to Baal inside the ancient city of Dan. Here we've got some little statues. This is Ashtoreth, also known as Astarte. It's actually a mold that they were able to cast using the ancient mold. And she's a fertility goddess, needless to say, based on the way she's represented here. Yeah, we've got some Baal representations, the bull. Here we have the plus with not just the plus, you see the light coming from different directions here. Cool here, because we've got these snakes, and these were used for worship, right? These were idols. And in Hebrew, it's a pun, the word snake. So Nachash, or this idol, is a pun. It's a visual pun. So Nachash is snake, and Nechosha is bronze or copper. And so Nachash and Nechosha is the copper snake. We have in the Tanakh and the Torah mention of the copper snake. And it may have looked something like this, the snake that was put on a pole. And most people lose sight of that story. It's in the book of Numbers, but the next time we hear about it is in the time of King Hezekiah. And we're told that from all the time from Moses until Hezekiah, remember the original copper snake was made by Moses, and they would look upon it and they would be healed. Well, after the time of Moses, they began to bring incense to it and burn incense to it and worship it. Right? It was a symbol that God had made for the people for a specific purpose. And instead what they do is they worship it. And so we're told that Hezekiah took the Nehushtan, the copper snake, and he ground it into a powder, into dust, and destroyed it. Because even though it was this relic that went back to the time of Moses and had great historical significance, it had become a snare for the people and idols. And it may have looked something like this. There's a gold one too. That's a cobra. That's more an Egyptian thing. Here we have some little incense altars, and the incense is modern that they put on it to show you how it was used. But they would put little incense on it and you could burn it. And they're made of metal, and you come to the temple, your idolatrous temple, and you put little incense on it and burn it to your pagan god.